The price of ambition. The call came on a Tuesday evening while rain pattered against the windows of their small apartment. Jo Martinez was stirring pasta sauce on the stove, humming softly to herself, when Ethan burst through the door with eyes that sparkled like she hadn't seen in months. "They chose me," he said, breathless, raindrops sliding from his dark curls onto his flushed cheeks. "National Geographic. They actually chose me for the international team." Jo's wooden spoon paused mid-stir. She'd always known this moment might come. Ethan had been submitting his portfolio to major publications since before they met 3 years ago, but the reality of it struck her like a physical blow. That's amazing," she managed, forcing her lips into what she hoped resembled a smile. "When do they want you to start?" 2 weeks. He crossed the kitchen in 3 strides, lifted her off her feet in an embrace that smelled of rain and excitement. 2 weeks, and I'll be documenting tribal communities in Papua New Guinea, then environmental conservation efforts in Malaysia, then 2 weeks? The sauce began to bubble aggressively, and Jo wiggled free to turn down the heat. "That's so soon?" Something in her voice made Ethan pause. He leaned against the counter, studying her face with the same intensity he brought to his photography. At 32, he had the kind of presence that filled rooms, tall and lean with eyes that noticed everything, cataloging details others missed. "Jo," he said carefully, "this is everything I've worked for. Everything we talked about when we first met." She nodded, tucking a strand of honey-brown hair behind her ear. "I know. I'm happy for you, truly. It's just, I thought we'd have more time to figure things out." The silence that followed carried a weight they both felt. Jo knew what figuring things out meant, how to maintain their relationship through what would be years of him traveling to the most remote corners of the world, while she remained anchored to the community college where she taught literature. "You could come with me," he offered. But the words sounded hollow even to him. They both knew her modest salary supported her aging mother's care facility payments. They both knew her life was here. Over the next 12 days, their apartment became a storm of preparation, equipment checks, visa applications, immunization appointments. Jo moved through it all as if sleepwalking, helping him pack specialized lenses and weather-resistant gear, while something inside her began to crack. On the 11th night, as they lay in bed not touching, Jo finally asked the question that had been forming since the moment he'd received that call. "What about us, Ethan?" He stared at the ceiling fan rotating slowly above them. "I don't know how to answer that." "Try," she whispered. He turned toward her, his expression a battlefield of conflicting emotions. "I love you, Jo, but this opportunity, it's who I am. It's who I've always been. And I'm not part of that person?" It's not that simple, but it was simple. By morning, the truth had crystallized between them. Ethan wanted a life of movement, of capturing fleeting moments in far-flung places. Jo represented roots, stability, things he both cherished and feared would hold him back. At the airport, they stood facing each other as announcements echoed around them. "I can't ask you to wait for me," he said finally. "It wouldn't be fair." Jo's fingers tightened around the strap of her purse. "And what exactly would be fair, Ethan?" He had no answer. Instead, he kissed her one last time, a kiss that tasted of ending, and walked toward his gate without looking back. 3 weeks later, Jo sat alone on the bathroom floor of their, now her, apartment, staring at the pregnancy test in her trembling hand. 2 pink lines that changed everything. She pressed her palm against her still flat stomach, tears flowing freely down her cheeks. "It's just us now," she whispered to the life growing inside her. "But we'll be okay." The next morning, she gave notice on the apartment. She couldn't bear to raise their child surrounded by the ghosts of what might have been. Instead, she applied for a teaching position in Meridian Cove, a small coastal town 200 miles north, far enough to start fresh, close enough to maintain her visits to her mother. As Jo drove away from the city that had held her entire adult life, she didn't allow herself to look in the rearview mirror. Whatever future awaited her, it would be built on her terms, with the fierce love she already felt for the child whose existence Ethan Williams would never know, or so she thought. The echo of regret. 5 years passed like the turning of pages in a well-loved book, each day writing itself into the story of Jo and Felicity's life in Meridian Cove. Jo's small bakery, Sweet Provisions, had become a cornerstone of the community, famous for pastries as warm and inviting as the woman who created them. On this particular morning, she was piping delicate roses onto a birthday cake when the bell above the door jingled. "Mommy!" Felicity burst in, her school backpack bouncing against her small frame. Behind her, Mrs. Winters, their elderly neighbor who watched Felicity after kindergarten on bakery days, offered a tired smile. "She's been bursting with news all afternoon," Mrs. Winters said, accepting the coffee Joe automatically prepared for her. Joe wiped her hands on her apron and crouched down to her daughter's level. "What's got you so excited, Sunshine?" Felicity's eyes, startlingly blue against her olive skin, widened with importance. "Teacher says a famous person is coming to our town. A person who takes pictures of animals in mountains and people from all over the whole wide world." Joe's hand stilled on her daughter's shoulders. "Did your teacher mention a name?" "Mr. Williams," Felicity announced proudly. "And he's going to have his pictures in the big building by the ocean." The piping bag on the counter leaked forgotten icing onto the floor. The Coastal Gallery occasionally featured renowned artists. But Joe had deliberately avoided checking their schedule for months, a practice of self-preservation that had now failed her. "That sounds very interesting," Joe managed, her voice impressively steady. "Why don't you help Mrs. Winters feed the birds while I finish this cake? Then we'll head home." After they left, Joe gripped the edge of the counter until her knuckles whitened. In 5 years, she had successfully built walls around the memory of Ethan Williams. She'd followed his career from a distance. Impossible not to when his photographs graced magazine covers and international award ceremonies, but had trained herself not to linger on thoughts of him. Now, like a high tide erasing careful lines drawn in sand, he was coming to their sanctuary. Half a world away, Ethan stood in a Hong Kong hotel room, phone pressed to his ear. "The Meridian Cove exhibition opens next Friday," his agent Tessa was saying. "Small venue, but strategic. The resort crowd there has serious money and collector connections." Ethan gazed at the city lights blurring through rain-streaked windows. At 37, success had carved itself into every aspect of his existence. His photographs captured the brutal beauty of climate change, the dignity of disappearing cultures, the raw emotion of human resilience. Critics called his work transcendent. The public called him brilliant. Most nights, alone in hotel rooms identical to this one, he called himself hollow. "Ethan, are you listening?" "Yes, sorry. Meridian Cove, next Friday. You'll need to be there by Wednesday for setup and press. I've scheduled a workshop with local photography students Thursday morning. Good PR and the foundation loves it when you do outreach." He rubbed his temples. "Fine. You sound thrilled," Tessa remarked dryly. "Should I remind you that this is the last stop before you get your 3-month break? The one you've been begging for? No need. I'll be there." After hanging up, Ethan opened his laptop. He'd never heard of Meridian Cove before Tessa added it to his exhibition schedule. A quick search revealed picturesque coastline, charming downtown, population just under 15,000. Perfect for wealthy vacationers seeking authenticity without sacrificing comfort. He scrolled through images of the town until fatigue claimed him. He dreamed, as he often did, of Joe, of her laughing in their kitchen, light streaming through the window making her glow. In the dream, she turned to him and asked, "Was it worth it?" He woke with no answer. The week before Ethan's arrival, Joe moved through her days with mechanical precision. She baked, she mothered, she smiled at customers, all while anxiety coursed beneath her skin like electricity. The possibility of encountering Ethan in a town this size approached certainty, and she found herself rehearsing potential scenarios during sleepless nights. Would he recognize her? Would she appear as a ghost from his past or merely a customer admiring his work? Would he see Felicity and somehow know? The questions plagued her. On Wednesday morning, Joe was arranging pastries in the display case when her assistant, Ruby, burst through the back door. "You won't believe who just walked into Harborside Coffee," Ruby announced, eyes wide. "That photographer, the one with the exhibition? I recognized him from the posters. Even more handsome in person, if that's possible." Joe's heart stuttered. "How nice," she said, focusing intently on aligning a row of croissants. "Nice. The man's practically a celebrity. Lily says he ordered black coffee and asked about local spots to photograph. She told him about the tide pools at Dawn Point. Dawn Point, where Joe took Felicity nearly every weekend. That evening, she studied her daughter across their small dining table. Felicity was explaining the intricacies of her kindergarten social hierarchy between bites of pasta, gesturing with her fork in a The bridge between worlds. Dawn broke over Meridian Cove in a spectacular display of amber and rose that would have typically sent Ethan reaching for his camera. Instead, he sat motionless on the balcony of his rented beach cottage, coffee cooling beside him, watching the colors bleed across the horizon without capturing them. The exhibition opening had been a success by any measure. Every piece sold, critics impressed, local media enthusiastic. Yet he felt oddly disconnected from the praise, as though they were celebrating someone else's accomplishments. This sensation had been growing for months, perhaps years, a widening gap between the person he presented to the world and whoever remained beneath the accolades. His phone chimed with a message from Tessa. Morning review in local paper glowing. Sending PDF. Weather perfect for your tide pool expedition. Get some good shots for the Foundation's annual report. The tide pools. He'd nearly forgotten his promise to document the marine conservation efforts there for his Foundation's promotional materials. Gathering his equipment with practiced efficiency, Ethan headed down the weathered wooden steps that led from his rental to the beach below. The morning air carried the scent of salt and possibilities as he walked along the shoreline, nodding at early joggers and dog walkers. For the first time in years, he wasn't hurrying toward a deadline or racing to capture a fleeting moment. The 3-month break stretching before him felt simultaneously liberating and terrifying. Approaching Dawn Point, he spotted several families already exploring the rocky outcroppings exposed by the retreating tide. Children balanced on slick stones, pointing excitedly at creatures revealed in small underwater worlds. Ethan began setting up his tripod at a respectful distance, framing shots that captured both the natural wonder and human connection to it. He was adjusting his lens when a child's delighted squeal cut through the ambient sounds of waves and conversation. Something about that particular voice made him look up. A small girl with dark curls stood triumphantly on a flat rock, pointing at something in the pool below her. "Mommy, I found one," a baby starfish just like Tyler said. The woman kneeling beside her wore a wide-brimmed hat that obscured her face. "That's wonderful, Sunshine. Remember what we talked about, we can look but we don't touch." The girl nodded solemnly. "Because it's their home and we're just visitors." Exactly right. There was something in the woman's voice, something that reached across years and grabbed Ethan by the throat. He lowered his camera slowly, heart hammering against his ribs. The little girl was moving again, balancing precariously as she leaned over another pool. The woman called after her, "Careful, Felicity." Then she stood, turning slightly to keep her daughter in sight, and Ethan saw her face. Joe. The world seemed to tilt beneath his feet. She looked different, hair shorter, face more angular, yet unmistakably herself. For several heartbeats he couldn't move, couldn't breathe, couldn't process the reality of her presence in this place he'd considered random on his itinerary. He might have remained frozen if the little girl, Felicity, hadn't jumped from one rock to another, slipping slightly on the landing. Joe lunged forward instinctively, catching her daughter's arm to steady her. Ethan moved without conscious decision, crossing the distance between them in long strides. "Let me help," he called, offering his hand to the child who had nearly fallen. Joe's head snapped up at the sound of his voice. Their eyes met over the tide pool, and 5 years of careful separation collapsed into nothing. "Ethan," she whispered, the name falling from her lips like a secret finally released. Felicity looked between them curiously, accepting Ethan's steadying hand without hesitation. "Do you know each other?" "Yes," Ethan said, unable to look away from Joe's face. "We did. A long time ago." The girl beamed, revealing a gap where her front tooth should have been. "Are you the picture-taking man from the big building? My teacher told us about you." "Felicity," Joe interrupted, her voice tight. "It's almost lunchtime. We should go." But Ethan was no longer listening to their words. He was looking, truly looking, at the child standing between them. At her blue eyes, identical to the ones he saw in the mirror each morning. At the way she gestured animatedly, at the curious tilt of her head, at the thousands of small details that suddenly aligned into an unmistakable truth. His gaze returned to Joe, a silent question expanding in the space between them. She gave an almost imperceptible nod, her eyes never leaving his face. "Mommy, can the picture man come have lunch with us? He can show me how to use a real camera." Ethan couldn't speak, couldn't form words around the realization crashing through him like a wave. He had a daughter whose entire existence he'd missed. Joe seemed to gather herself, squaring her shoulders. Mr. Williams is very busy, sunshine. I'm not, Ethan interrupted, finding his voice at last. I'm not busy at all. The three of them stood in tableau amid the tide pools. The man who had chosen ambition, the woman who had built a life without him, and the child who connected them irrevocably. Around them, families continued their explorations, oblivious to the seismic shift occurring in their midst. Please, Ethan said softly, the word containing 5 years of unasked questions. Joe hesitated, then nodded once. There's a cafe near the bakery. We can talk there. As they walked up from the beach, Felicity skipping ahead, Ethan felt tears threatening. Not of self-pity or regret, though both emotions churned within him, but of overwhelming gratitude for this chance he'd done nothing to deserve. She's incredible, he managed finally, his voice rough with emotion. Yes, Joe agreed, watching their daughter with eyes full of fierce love. She is. I don't know what to say. I don't know where to begin. Joe was quiet for several steps. Neither do I. I never planned for this day. Did you ever think about telling me? Every day at first, then less often as we built our life here. She glanced at him sideways. Would it have mattered, Ethan? Would you have come back? The question struck him like a physical blow, not because it was unfair, but because he couldn't honestly answer it. The man he'd been then, consumed by ambition and the fear of missing opportunities, might have sent money but continued his chosen path. I don't know, he admitted. But I'm not that person anymore. And I'm not who I was either, Joe replied. That's the thing about time, it changes us whether we wanted to or not. Ahead of them, Felicity had stopped to examine a shell, her small figure framed against the endless blue of the ocean. Watching her, Ethan felt something shift within him, a reordering of priorities so fundamental it left him breathless. I've spent 5 years chasing moments, he said quietly, trying to capture beauty and truth for others to see. And all this time, the most important moment of my life was happening without me. Joe's expression softened slightly. We can't go back, Ethan, I know, he took a deep breath. But maybe we can go forward, differently than before. I have a 3-month break starting now. I could stay in Meridian Cove, get to know her, get to know who you've become, and then what? You leave again when the world calls? The question hung between them as Felicity ran back, brandishing her shell triumphantly. Ethan knelt to admire her treasure, fighting to keep his emotions from overwhelming him as she explained its patterns with the same enthusiasm he'd once described light conditions to Joe. Later, over sandwiches at the cafe, Ethan watched his daughter chattering about kindergarten and starfish and her mom's famous cinnamon rolls. Occasionally, his eyes met Joe's across the table, sometimes guarded, sometimes softening with shared recognition of Felicity's mannerisms. When Felicity went to examine the cafe's fish tank, Ethan leaned forward. I understand if you don't trust me. I haven't earned it. But please don't send me away without a chance to be part of her life, even if it's just as a friend of her mother's at first. Joe studied him, searching for something in his face. It's not that simple. Nothing important ever is. He hesitated. For what it's worth, I've never stopped wondering if I made the right choice that day at the airport. I've seen wonders, Joe. I've stood in places most people only dream about. But there's been a hollowness to all of it. Something missing that no achievement could fill. That doesn't mean we were the answer, she said softly. Maybe you just needed something to care about more than yourself. Her words stung with their accuracy. Before he could respond, Felicity returned, climbing onto the chair beside him. Mr. Pictureman, she said seriously, do you know how to make the perfect castle with wet sand? Because mine always fall down. I've built sand castles on beaches all over the world, he told her, his heart expanding painfully in his chest. But I bet yours could be the best of all with the right technique. Felicity beamed. Can you show me, please? Ethan looked at Joe, a silent question. After a long moment, she nodded. We usually go to Lighthouse Beach on Sunday afternoons. If you'd like to join us, it wasn't forgiveness. It wasn't even a promise. But as Ethan watched understanding dawn in his daughter's eyes, that this might become a regular occurrence, this man in their carefully constructed life, he recognized it for what it was, a beginning. The path ahead would be complicated. There would be difficult conversations, boundaries to establish, trust to rebuild. But sitting there with the family he hadn't known he had, Ethan felt something he hadn't experienced in years. the sense of being exactly where he belonged. For a man who had spent his life capturing fleeting moments, he finally understood the value of staying for all the moments to come. Fragile foundations. Sunday arrived with perfect beach weather, gentle breeze, scattered clouds providing occasional respite from the sun, and waves that broke with just enough force to delight a 5-year-old. Ethan arrived at Lighthouse Beach 30 minutes early. His stomach knotted with anticipation. He'd spent the intervening days in a state of suspended animation, wandering the small town that Joe and Felicity called home, trying to imagine their daily routines. Twice he'd walked past Sweet Provisions, pausing outside long enough to see Joe working behind the counter, her movements confident as she served customers with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. Both times he'd moved on without entering. Now, he arranged his small collection of sandcastle tools on a blanket, professional-grade spatulas he'd purchased from the local hardware store, various containers for molding, even a miniature level that had made him smile in the checkout line, imagining Felicity's serious expression as she used it. "You came early, too." The voice startled him. Felicity stood barefoot in the sand, wearing a yellow swimsuit covered with tiny turtles and clutching a purple bucket. Joe followed several paces behind, carrying a beach bag and looking as though she might still change her mind. "I wanted to find the perfect spot," Ethan explained, gesturing to the area he'd selected, close enough to the water for wet sand, but high enough to avoid the incoming tide. Felicity examined his tools with wide-eyed appreciation. "You brought real castle-building things. Only the best for a proper sand architect," he said solemnly. Joe set down her bag, arranging a towel a careful distance from Ethan's blanket. "Sunscreen first, sunshine," she reminded Felicity, who groaned but obediently stood still for the application, watching Joe's gentle efficiency as she protected their daughter from the sun's harmful effects. Ethan felt a wave of gratitude mingled with profound loss. How many moments like this had he missed? First steps, first words, first everything. "Mr. Picture Man, are you coming?" Felicity called, already heading toward the shoreline. "You should probably call me Ethan," he said, glancing at Joe for permission. She nodded slightly. "She knows your last name from school. She'll make the connection eventually." The implication hung in the air, that someday Felicity would need to know the full truth, but not today. Today was for building castles. For the next hour, Ethan lost himself in Felicity's world, showing her how to pack sand properly, carve windows with precision, and create perfect turrets using upturned cups. Joe remained on her towel, alternating between reading a paperback and watching them with an expression Ethan couldn't decipher. "You're really good at this," Felicity declared as their creation grew more elaborate. "Thank you," Ethan replied, oddly touched by the simple compliment. "I've had a lot of practice waiting for the right light for photographs. Sandcastles pass the time. What's the right light? It's when the sun hits something in just the perfect way to make it beautiful." Felicity considered this seriously. Is there right light for people too? The question, so innocent yet profound, caught him off guard. "Yes," he said finally. "Everyone has light that makes them shine their brightest. Sometimes it's a place or a time of day or—" He glanced toward Joe. "The people they're with." "Mommy's light is in the morning at the bakery," Felicity announced confidently. "She sings when she thinks nobody's listening." Ethan smiled, storing away this detail about the woman he'd once known so well. That sounds exactly right. When their masterpiece was complete, a sprawling fortress with a moat, bridge, and carefully sculpted stairs, Felicity insisted Joe join them for the official photograph. "I need to document this achievement properly," Ethan said, retrieving his camera from his bag. "Every great structure deserves to be preserved for history." Joe approached cautiously as though the sandcastle represented territory she wasn't sure she should enter. She knelt beside Felicity, who immediately began pointing out architectural features with pride. Through his viewfinder, Ethan saw them together, mother and daughter, heads bent close, sunlight catching in their hair, and felt his throat tighten. He captured the moment with hands that weren't quite steady, knowing no photograph in his acclaimed portfolio would ever mean as much as this imperfect image. "Can I see?" Felicity asked after he'd taken several shots. He showed her the digital display, watching her face light up with recognition. "It looks just like the pictures in the big building." "The ones you took!" Ethan glanced at Joe, who was brushing sand from her hands with deliberate focus. "Have you seen my exhibition?" he asked carefully. Mommy took me yesterday, Felicity said happily. There were lots of people, but I liked the pictures of the ice houses best. The ones where people live in the really cold place? Greenland, Joe supplied quietly. We went in the afternoon after the crowds had thinned. The knowledge that Joe had taken their daughter to see his work, that she'd chosen to expose Felicity to this part of him even before, today felt significant in ways he couldn't articulate. Did you like it? He asked, the question directed at Joe rather than Felicity. She met his eyes finally. Your work has evolved. It's more intimate now, more human. I've been trying to see differently these past couple years, he admitted, to find the stories behind the spectacle. A small smile touched her lips. I noticed. That tiny acknowledgement felt more valuable than any critical acclaim he'd received. Before he could respond, a wave surged higher than expected, reaching their castle and eroding one corner. No, Felicity cried, rushing to assess the damage. We can fix it, Ethan assured her. But even as he spoke, another wave pushed further up the beach. Felicity's lower lip trembled as she watched water seep into their creation's foundation. But it's ruining everything. Joe knelt beside her. That's the thing about sandcastles, sunshine. They're not meant to last forever. Their beauty is in the making and the enjoying, not in staying perfect. But I don't want it to go away, Felicity protested. That's why we took pictures, Ethan said gently. So even when things change, we can remember them as they were. Felicity considered this, looking between the disintegrating castle and Ethan's camera. Can we build another one next time? Next time. The words hung in the air, a question and a possibility. Joe met Ethan's gaze over their daughter's head. We'll see, she said finally. Right now I think someone needs ice cream, Ader. As they walked along the boardwalk with dripping cones, Felicity skipping ahead to examine shop windows, Ethan gathered his courage. Thank you for today, he said quietly, for letting me be part of this. Joe licked her ice cream thoughtfully before responding. I didn't do it for you. I know. She's curious about everything, especially people. It was only a matter of time before she started asking more questions about her father. The word, father, spoken aloud between them for the first time, landed like a stone in still water, ripples expanding outward. What have you told her? That her father lives far away, taking pictures of important things. That he doesn't live with us, but that doesn't mean he's a bad person. Joe's voice remained steady, matter of fact. I never wanted her to think she was abandoned or unwanted, even if that's what I did to you, Ethan finished. Joe didn't contradict him. Children shouldn't carry their parents' broken stories. Ahead of them, Felicity had discovered a display of kites dancing in the sea breeze outside a toy shop. Her delight was visible even from a distance. Joe, Ethan began, struggling to find words adequate for all he needed to express. I know I have no right to ask for anything, but if you'd allow it, I'd like to be in her life, not just these 3 months, but going forward. Whatever that looks like, whatever boundaries you need. She didn't answer immediately, watching their daughter instead. And what happens when your break ends? When National Geographic calls with the next must-photograph crisis or wonder? I've been thinking about that since the tide pools, he admitted. About restructuring my work. Taking fewer international assignments. Maybe focusing on teaching, on my foundation work. Things that would let me have a home base. Here, Joe asked, skepticism evident in her voice. If that's where Felicity is, yes. I've missed 5 years. I don't want to miss anymore. Joe sighed, rubbing her temple with her free hand. It's not that simple, Ethan. You can't just insert yourself into our lives and rearrange everything. We have routines, stability. She has school friends, her whole world is here. I'm not asking to disrupt that. I'm asking for a chance to be part of it. And what about us? Joe gestured between them. What exactly are you picturing? Playing happy family on weekends while maintaining separate lives? Co-parenting across continents? The question cut to the heart of what Ethan had been avoiding. The complexity of their personal relationship apart from Felicity. I don't know, he admitted. I just know that seeing you again, meeting her, it's like waking up from a 5-year dream. Or maybe the dream was before and this is reality finally breaking through. Joe's expression softened almost imperceptibly. We're not the same people, Ethan. You need to be prepared for that. I'm not the woman who waited for you to come home from shoots, who built her life around your ambitions. I wouldn't want you to be, he said honestly. I like who you've become. What I've seen of her anyway, strong, independent. An amazing mother. Mommy, can I have a kite, please? Felicity had backtracked to tug at Joe's free hand, pointing excitedly at the display. The conversation paused as Joe examined the price tag on a rainbow-striped kite, hesitation flickering across her features. Ethan recognized the mental calculation of a single parent weighing wants against necessities. I'd be happy to, he began. Not today, sunshine. Joe cut him off gently but firmly. Your birthday's coming up soon, remember? Let's add it to your wish list. Felicity's disappointment lasted only moments before she was distracted by a street performer juggling nearby. As she dashed off to watch, Joe turned to Ethan with quiet intensity. Don't try to buy her affection. Don't make promises you can't keep, and don't ever make me the bad guy when I set boundaries. Those are my terms, Ethan nodded solemnly. Agreed. 100%. I need time to think about next steps. This isn't just about today or tomorrow. I understand. He hesitated, then added, for what it's worth, I think you've done an amazing job raising her. She's everything. More than I could have imagined. Something in Joe's expression shifted, a flash of vulnerability quickly contained. She is. She checked her watch. We should get going. It's nearly dinner time and she has school tomorrow. As they walked toward the parking lot, Felicity between them, occasionally taking both their hands to swing forward, Ethan felt simultaneously more complete and more terrified than he had in years. There were no guarantees here, no certainty that Joe would ultimately allow him the role he desperately wanted in their daughter's life. But for the first time since receiving that call from National Geographic in their Rain Streak department, he understood what truly mattered, what success actually looked like when stripped of accolades and recognition. It looked like a child's smile, like trust being cautiously rebuilt, like the chance to repair what had been broken by his own choices. As they reached Joe's car, Felicity surprised him with a quick hug around his waist. Thank you for teaching me about castles, she said, her voice muffled against his shirt. Ethan froze momentarily, then gently returned the embrace, meeting Joe's gaze over their daughter's head. Her expression was unreadable, but she didn't pull Felicity away. You're welcome, he managed, his voice rough with emotion. Anytime, it wasn't a promise. Not quite, but as he watched them drive away, Ethan Williams, who had spent his career capturing defining moments, recognized this as the most important one of his life. I'll create 2 additional parts to continue the story of Ethan. Joe and Felicity, Part 4, Fragile Foundations. Sunday arrived with perfect beach weather, gentle breeze, scattered clouds providing occasional respite from the sun, and waves that broke with just enough force to delight a 5-year-old. Ethan arrived at Lighthouse Beach 30 minutes early. His stomach knotted with anticipation. He'd spent the intervening days in a state of suspended animation, wandering the small town that Joe and Felicity called home, trying to imagine their daily routines. Twice he'd walked past Sweet Provisions, pausing outside long enough to see Joe working behind the counter, her movements confident as she served customers with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. Both times he'd moved on without entering. Now, he arranged his small collection of sandcastle tools on a blanket, professional-grade spatulas he'd purchased from the local hardware store, various containers for molding, even a miniature level that had made him smile in the checkout line, imagining Felicity's serious expression as she used it. You came early too, the voice startled him. Felicity stood barefoot in the sand, wearing a yellow swimsuit covered with tiny turtles and clutching a purple bucket. Joe followed several paces behind, carrying a beach bag and looking as though she might still change her mind. I wanted to find the perfect spot, Ethan explained, gesturing to the area he'd selected, close enough to the water for wet sand, but high enough to avoid the incoming tide. Felicity examined his tools with wide-eyed appreciation. You brought real castle-building things. Only the best for a proper sand architect, he said solemnly. Joe set down her bag, arranging a towel a careful distance from Ethan's blanket. Sunscreen first, sunshine, she reminded Felicity, who groaned but obediently stood still for the application. Watching Joe's gentle efficiency as she protected their daughter from the sun's harmful effects, Ethan felt a wave of gratitude mingled with profound loss. How many moments like this had he missed? First steps, first words, first everything. Mr. Pictureman, are you coming? Felicity called, already heading toward the shoreline. You should probably call me Ethan, he said, glancing at Joe for permission. She nodded slightly. She knows your last name from school. She'll make the connection eventually. The implication hung in the air that someday Felicity would need to know the full truth. But not today. Today was for building castles. For the next hour, Ethan lost himself in Felicity's world, showing her how to pack sand properly, carve windows with precision, and create perfect turrets using upturned cups. Joe remained on her towel, alternating between reading a paperback and watching them with an expression Ethan couldn't decipher. You're really good at this, Felicity declared as their creation grew more elaborate. Thank you, Ethan replied, oddly touched by the simple compliment. I've had a lot of practice waiting for the right light for photographs. Sandcastles pass the time. What's the right light? It's when the sun hits something in just the perfect way to make it beautiful. Felicity considered this seriously. Is there right light for people too? The question, so innocent yet profound, caught him off guard. Yes, he said finally. Everyone has light that makes them shine their brightest. Sometimes it's a place or a time of day or... He glanced toward Joe. The people they're with. Mommy's light is in the morning at the bakery, Felicity announced confidently. She sings when she thinks nobody's listening. Ethan smiled, storing away this detail about the woman he'd once known so well. That sounds exactly right. When their masterpiece was complete, a sprawling fortress with a moat, bridge, and carefully sculpted stairs, Felicity insisted Joe join them for the official photograph. I need to document this achievement properly, Ethan said, retrieving his camera from his bag. Every great structure deserves to be preserved for history. Joe approached cautiously, as though the sandcastle represented territory she wasn't sure she should enter. She knelt beside Felicity, who immediately began pointing out architectural features with pride. Through his viewfinder, Ethan saw them together, mother and daughter, heads bent close, sunlight catching in their hair, and felt his throat tighten. He captured the moment with hands that weren't quite steady, knowing no photograph in his acclaimed portfolio would ever mean as much as this imperfect image. Can I see? Felicity asked after he'd taken several shots. He showed her the digital display, watching her face light up with recognition. It looks just like the pictures in the big building. The ones you took? Ethan glanced at Joe, who was brushing sand from her hands with deliberate focus. Have you seen my exhibition? He asked carefully. Mommy took me yesterday, Felicity said happily. There were lots of people, but I liked the pictures of the ice houses best. The ones where people live in the really cold place? Greenland, Joe supplied quietly. We went in the afternoon after the crowds had thinned. The knowledge that Joe had taken their daughter to see his work, that she'd chosen to expose Felicity to this part of him even before, today felt significant in ways he couldn't articulate. Did you like it? He asked, the question directed at Joe rather than Felicity. She met his eyes finally. Your work has evolved. It's more intimate now, more human. I've been trying to see differently these past couple years, he admitted, to find the stories behind the spectacle. A small smile touched her lips. I noticed. That tiny acknowledgement felt more valuable than any critical acclaim he'd received. Before he could respond, a wave surge. There were difficult conversations about child support, about what Ethan had missed, about the life Joe had built without him. There were tense negotiations around holidays and schedules. But there were also unexpected moments of connection, shared laughter over Felicity's pronunciation of hypothesis, quiet appreciation as they watched their daughter perform in her school play, the occasional lingering glance that neither acknowledged afterward. On the morning Ethan was scheduled to leave, for his first assignment since moving to Meridian Cove, a 2-week project documenting coastal erosion in Maine, he found himself standing outside Sweet Provisions before opening hours. Through the window, he could see Joe working in the pre-dawn quiet, hair pulled back, moving with the easy confidence of someone in their element. She looked up at his knock, surprise registering briefly before she came to unlock the door. Early even for you, she commented, stepping back to let him enter. The bakery smelled of cinnamon and rising dough, comforting and warm. Flight leaves at 9, he explained, setting a folder on the counter. I wanted to drop this off before I left. Joe opened it to find a detailed schedule of his trip, contact information for his accommodations, and flight numbers. Very organized. I want you to know where I am, that I'm coming back. The unspoken remained between them, that this was different from the last time he'd walked away. She nodded, appreciating the gesture for what it was, evidence of his commitment to their new arrangement. Felicity made this for you, she said, retrieving a folded paper from behind the counter. She wanted to give it to you herself, but I told her you had to leave early. Ethan carefully unfolded the crayon drawing, a rainbow-hued interpretation of what appeared to be 3 people standing on a beach, the tallest holding what might be a camera. She'll miss you, Joe said quietly. We've talked about how 2 weeks is 14 sleeps and that you'll call every night before bedtime. I'll miss her too. Ethan looked up from the drawing. Both of you. The admission hung in the air between them, neither acknowledging nor dismissing its significance. Safe travels, Joe said finally, turning back to her work. But as Ethan reached the door, she added, Ethan? He paused, looking back. When you see something beautiful, take a picture for Felicity. She wants to see the world through your eyes. The simple request, the first Joe had made of him that wasn't practical or logistical, felt like a small but important shift. I will, he promised. Every day. True to his word, Ethan called every evening, sharing the day's discoveries with an increasingly confident Felicity. He sent photographs, not just the professional shots for his assignment, but personal ones. A heart-shaped stone on the beach, a particularly magnificent sunrise, a lighthouse that reminded him of their own. To Joe, he sent different images, quieter, more contemplative. A coffee shop that resembled sweet provisions, an elderly couple walking hand in hand along the shore, a mother and child silhouetted against the setting sun. He never attached messages to these photographs, letting them speak for themselves. She never acknowledged receiving them, but sometimes, in their brief conversations when he called for Felicity, he sensed a new warmth in her voice. On his final evening away, after Felicity had exhausted her daily report of kindergarten events and fallen asleep mid-conversation, Joe stayed on the line. She's out, she said softly, curled up with the phone still in her hand. I miss her, Ethan admitted. More than I expected. She's easy to miss. A pause. Your flight gets in tomorrow at 2? Yes, I should be back in Meridian Cove by 4, traffic permitting. Another pause, longer this time. We're making a special dinner to celebrate your homecoming. The word homecoming struck Ethan with unexpected force. In 15 years of traveling the world, no one had ever described his return as coming home. I'd like that, he managed. Very much. Good. Her voice softened further. Ethan? Yes? I've been looking at your photographs. The ones you've been sending me. And? They're different from your professional work. More intimate. Ethan smiled into the darkness of his hotel room. They're what I actually see, not what I think others want to see. I like them, Joe said simply. They feel honest. After they hung up, Ethan stood at the window of his hotel room, looking out at the unfamiliar coastline. For the first time in his career, he felt impatient to complete an assignment, eager to return not to the next destination, but to the place and people he had left behind. The revelation was both terrifying and exhilarating. For a man who had built his life around constant movement, the pull of a single location of permanence was unfamiliar territory. Ethan's return flight landed early. He collected his luggage with uncharacteristic haste and drove the coastal highway with windows down, breathing in the familiar salt air of Meridian Cove. He had intended to go straight to his cottage, unpack, shower away the travel grime. Instead, he found himself parking outside Sweet Provisions. Through the window, he could see Joe serving customers, moving with graceful efficiency behind the counter. The afternoon sunlight slanted through the bakery windows, catching in her hair, illuminating her profile as she smiled at something a customer said. Perfect light, he thought, remembering his conversation with Felicity on the beach, the kind that makes someone shine their brightest. He remained in his car, watching without interrupting, content simply to be back in the orbit of the life he was gradually building. After a few minutes, he started the engine and drove home to prepare for dinner. When he arrived at Joe and Felicity's cottage that evening, he was greeted by a hand-painted banner stretched across the porch. Welcome home, Dad. The lettering was wobbly, clearly Felicity's work with assistance on the spelling. Before he could ring the bell, the door flew open, and Felicity launched herself at him, nearly toppling the potted plant he carried as a gift. "You're back, you're back, you're back," she chanted, wrapping her arms around his legs. Ethan set down the plant to lift her properly, his heart expanding as she pressed her face against his neck. "I missed you, Starfish," he said, using the nickname that had developed since their tide pool meeting. 14 whole sleeps, she confirmed solemnly. "That's a really long time." Over her shoulder, he saw Joe standing in the doorway, watching them with an expression that contained too many emotions to catalog. When their eyes met, she smiled, a genuine smile that reached her eyes. "Welcome home," she said softly, echoing the banner's message. And for the first time in his adult life, Ethan Williams, who had searched for belonging in the most remote corners of the earth, finally understood what it meant to be truly home. Dinner was a joyful affair, with Felicity recounting every moment he'd missed in elaborate detail, while Joe occasionally interjected with clarifications or context. They had prepared his favorite meal. How Joe remembered his preference for grilled salmon after 5 years. He couldn't imagine. And Felicity had insisted on making dessert herself, resulting in slightly lopsided cupcakes with excessive frosting. "These are the best cupcakes I've ever had," Ethan declared, causing Felicity to beam with pride. "Mommy helped with the oven part," she admitted. "But I did the important stuff." After dinner, as Felicity showed him her latest art projects from school, Joe slipped outside to the small back porch. Through the window, Ethan could see her silhouette against the gathering dusk, arms wrapped around herself in the evening chill. "I'll be right back, Starfish," he promised, grabbing his jacket from the back of his chair. He found Joe leaning against the porch railing, gazing up at the first stars appearing in the darkening sky. "Mind some company?" he asked, draping his jacket around her shoulders without waiting for an answer. She accepted it with a small nod, pulling it closer around her. "How was your trip?" "Really? Productive. Important work." He leaned against the railing beside her, careful to maintain a respectful distance. "But I kept thinking about what I was missing here." Felicity really did count the sleeps, every night crossing them off on her calendar. "And you?" he asked quietly. "Did you miss me too?" Joe was silent for a long moment, her profile illuminated by the soft glow from the kitchen windows. "It was strange," she admitted finally, "having you gone after getting used to having you around." "Strange good or strange bad?" A small smile curved her lips. "Both, I think. It was like muscle memory, remembering what it felt like when you left the first time but knowing it was different now." "It is different," he said firmly. "Everything is different." Joe turned to face him, studying his expression with careful attention. "Is it enough? This life, I mean. After everything you've seen, everything you've done, is a small town with a 5-year-old soccer games and school plays really enough?" The question cut to the heart of what had been unspoken between them, her fear that history would eventually repeat itself, that the world would call him away again. "It's more than enough," Ethan said with quiet conviction. "The truth is, Joe, I've been searching my whole life for what was right in front of me that day at the airport. A home, a purpose beyond myself." He gestured toward the warm light of the kitchen where Felicity could be seen arranging her drawings on the table. "Being her father, being part of both your lives, even in this careful way we've constructed, it's the most meaningful work I've ever done." Joe's expression softened. "I believe you mean that today. I'll mean it tomorrow too. And the day after that." He took a chance, reaching out to gently touch her hand where it rested on the railing. "I'm not asking for promises or commitments, Joe. Just possibility." She didn't pull away from his touch. "Possibility," she repeated thoughtfully. Before she could say more, the back door opened and Felicity bounded onto the porch. "You're missing the best part," she announced. "I made you a special coming home present and it's ready." "We can't miss that," Joe said, smiling at their daughter's enthusiasm. As they turned to go inside, Joe's hand briefly, almost imperceptibly, squeezed Ethan's before releasing it. A small gesture, a tiny acknowledgement, a beginning. Later that night, as Ethan drove back to his cottage under a canopy of stars, he felt a sense of peace that had eluded him for years. The road ahead wasn't clear or certain. There were still conversations to be had, trust to be rebuilt, a lifetime of parenting to navigate together. But for the first time, he understood with perfect clarity what truly mattered. Not the transient thrill of capturing a perfect image or the fleeting satisfaction of recognition, but the enduring joy of being present for the moments that couldn't be photographed, only lived. As he parked outside his cottage, his phone chimed with a message from Joe. Felicity's birthday party planning committee meets tomorrow, 4 p.m. at Sweet Provisions. Your input is required for cake flavors and theme selection. Don't be late. Beneath the practical information, she had added a postscript that made him smile in the darkness. P.S. I might have missed you too. Just a little. Ethan Williams, who had spent his life chasing light around the world, finally recognized that sometimes the most beautiful illumination comes not from perfect sunsets or dramatic landscapes, but from the quiet glow of possibility and the courage to remain present for whatever develops.